Merci, Madam Speaker. I wish to thank you and all of my colleagues in the House tonight for having this Take Note debate. This evening, we have the gut-wrenching task of trying to sum up the true travesty of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited peoples in Canada. It's important that I emphasize that because I feel like we've been, saying these terms, MMIWG, that we're losing the emphasis on what this really is and how serious, this discussion is tonight. I'm deeply humbled and fully aware of my white privilege, also while addressing this House on this solemn day. And tonight I speak from unceded Wolastoq territory, where my ancestors settled on stolen land, where the Crown signed peace and friendship treaties with Wabanaki sovereign nations and agreed to share the land. In the Eastern Woodlands, grandmothers, Newcomzugs, they raise up the chiefs. Matriarchs are leaders and life givers, knowledge keepers, dream weavers, and Two-Spirited peoples are cherished and gifted. They became targets for the colonizers, who had no intent to share the land, but to clear the way for Canada. The proliferation of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples in this country fits the international definition of genocide. It is the manifestation of sustained, overt, and systemic racism in its most perverse and deadly form. Red Dress Day is a day of honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited peoples. It's a day to raise awareness, and it must also be a day centered on action for a human rights crisis. Indigenous women are 3 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to be victims of violence, and homicides involving Indigenous female victims were 4 times higher than that of homicides involving non-Indigenous female victims. This current public data on MMIWG oversimplifies and underrepresents the scale of the issue, yet still clearly demonstrates a complex, pervasive, and disproportionate pattern of violence against Indigenous women and girls. We should all be outraged, but not surprised, knowing our painful history and ongoing injustices in this country. It is an inconvenient truth that continues to claim the lives of mothers, sisters, aunties, and daughters all across this country, including here at home in Fredericton. MMIWG are not numbers. They are loved and missed and part of the fabric of our communities, and we are failing them. We need to be asking more questions about impacts on women when we make decisions in this country, and as has been aptly discussed this evening, specifically when certain types of industry bring transient workforces to the doorsteps of Indigenous communities, which studies show leads to increased rates of reported violence. Systemically, police are not investigating cases at the same rates as for non-Indigenous victims of crime. And in some cases, police have even been found to be involved or complicit. Justice for Chantal. Human traffickers are out in full swing. Serial killers, gangs, and domestic abusers seek and find their preferred targets. As society has sexualized and objectified Indigenous women, and it has been going on for so long, and it's so embedded in our society that we find ourselves now scrambling to grapple with the magnitude of a crisis that the very history of our nation created. We passed the UNDRIP Act in this House, an incredible feat. My concern then, as it is now, is that we have not fully come to terms with what we finally acknowledged about ourselves. We have yet to face facts, Canada, even as the Act spells it out for us. To bring justice, to bring healing, to bring peace, we have to decolonize in the fullest sense of the term. That is where the gaping wound begins. Decolonizing can be a scary word for some, but what's really scary, Madam Speaker, is the reality that Indigenous women in Canada have to wonder if they're next. What can we do? We can honor the work of the MMIWG report on the National Inquiry entitled Reclaiming Power and Place. Follow the path graciously and courageously laid out for us. We need to listen to, believe, and support survivors and families, fund healing initiatives like resiliency lodges and justice projects, friendship centers, and women's organizations, equip task forces and Indigenous policing services, educate the public, and deal in honesty and transparency every step of the way. There is a commitment by our government to address the wrongs. The time is now for transformative action. It was actually many, many years ago. And for Turtle Island, it is now time to be a safe, supportive, and honorable place where Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited peoples can thrive. And when that happens, we will all be better for it. Madam Speaker, no more stolen sisters. To the community of Sidensis in my riding and to all of Fredericton, let's bring Erin home. Let's break the cycle of silence. Wooliwin, thank you.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member for her passionate and thoughtful speech. I wonder if she would like to identify some specific policy changes that she would suggest that the government consider in terms of addressing this problem, given the ongoing nature of the problem. If she could propose any specific ideas that the government should be doing differently to respond to it.
The honourable member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from his writing. I want to, I pointed out a couple things that was specifically highlighted in the report, but I'd like to highlight as well some of the words from the member from Spanish Gulf Island. A guaranteed livable income was pointed out as a means to support those who may be fleeing domestic violence situations. And this can happen for anyone across the country, but as we know, it disproportionately affects Indigenous women in particular. So that's an example of something transformative. We can do incremental pieces. We can look at funding long-term programs, but really it's got to be something that's on a societal level that's going to really, create the space that's going to ensure that women have safe places to go when they're facing the increased rates of violence. So that's just one example, is that guaranteed livable income, but also transportation was another piece that was mentioned, and that's critically important. So those are a couple examples, but again, read the report. It is laid out there for us. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The member talked about how the government continues to support the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls cause for justice. But the reality is this: the Coalition for Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in British Columbia were shut out of the process. And after the inquiry and the final report was tabled, to this day, they do not get recognition from the government to ensure that they have a voice at the table to see its implementation. And who is at the coalition? They are family members and their women organizations, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous women, who's done the hard work in our community calling for this national inquiry. So my question to the member is this: would she call out the Liberal government to do the right thing and provide support to organizations such as the Coalition in British Columbia so that they can have a seat at the table and so that they can ensure action, real action, meaningful action is taken on the path forward in implementing the cause for justice?
A member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague so much, and I respect her work in this House. I specifically, joined the Liberal Party of Canada to have these conversations, to be a voice that empowers those voices from my local community here, but of course those from coast to coast to coast in critical organizations such as the Native Women's Association of Canada. There are many times when those voices are often shut out of these processes, and that's part of that systemic racism that we continue to see. It's ongoing, and I certainly did not use my time in my speech to sing the praises of the work that's been done. I know that we need to, it's full time now, that we have that commitment now. And I see that with the members in the House speaking together. We're united in this, but I want you to know that the government that I'm a part of, the conversations that we have, they are absolutely committed to righting the wrongs. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Brief question, the honourable member for Spanish Gulf Islands.
Yes, the honourable member for Fredericton. First, thank her for her very good speech. She said very briefly, justice for Chantal. It's been almost 2 years since Chantal Moore was murdered in Edmundston by a municipal police officer. I asked the honourable member for Fredericton if she is, like me, completely dissatisfied with the cover-up of her murder.
The honourable member for Fredericton has 1 minute to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from Spanish Gulf Islands. My heart breaks for Chantal and her family, for her daughter, and I'll be marching tomorrow with our local communities here in Fredericton. I'll be holding with me, it's a tiny yellow wooden T-shirt that represents Chantal and her daughter. Gracie gave that to me, and I think about her many, many times, when we have these conversations, and I am absolutely, outraged that she has yet to find justice. And I will continue to be a voice for her daughter and her mother and her family, and the pain that they suffer and what's ongoing. So thank you so much for that question.